welcome to the 3rd International Poetry Festival of Patras. We hope you enjoy poetry and discuss the value of poetry in the present age. First of all, I would like to let you know that we are live streaming, so we might have some changes to our program. So, next to me are sitting Mr. Antonis Kathas and Mr. Triandafylos Kotopoulos. Mr. Triandafylos Kotopoulos, give us your comment.
Thank you very much, Iliana. Dear colleagues, well-established poets, I would like to welcome you to the 3rd Patras World Poetry Festival. I'm a professor in creative writing and contemporary Greek literature in the University of Western Macedonia in Greece. And as the president of the festival, allow me to emphasize that your participation is a great honor and pleasure for us. Under different circumstances, now we would be your hosts in Patras. We would have hung banners with your poems on the city's main streets, and we'd be enjoying some very interesting conversation and discussions on poetry, person to person, face to face. And all of this will happen if you come next year in Patras. Life will prevail, poetry will prevail. I have to comment that it's in our intention to produce a number of print and electronic publications for the events of the festival, and we will have a rich biography of the poets who participated and, of course, of your indicative works. Soon we are going to receive an email from us with our thoughts and proposal about further collaboration with you. Next to me is sitting one of the most important Greek poets, Antonis Kathas, the president of the Poetry Office and the main person in charge of the festival, the president of our heart. I would like to thank my colleague, Kostas Gouliamos, for his presence as a poet and as the moderator of tonight's round table. Professor Dr. Kostas Gouliamos is the rector of the European University CYPRUS and ordinary member of European Academy of Sciences and Arts. He was also awarded the status of honorary professor in 2 universities in China. He has written a considerable number of books, chapters, and papers on issues pertinent to media, culture, politics, and communication. His work has been translated in several languages: French, Spanish, Slovak, Chinese, English, Italian. Kostas Gouliamos co-authored the book The Dialectics of Harmony with the globally infamous composer Mexis 2018, from Gutenberg. He has also published a number of poetry collections. One of them, Neurasthenic Landscapes, was chosen for publication and audiovisual presentations by the world prominent composer Manos Hadzidakis in 1981. Kostas has translated into Greek William Faulkner, Nobel Prize winner literature, Octavio Paz, Nobel Prize winner literature, and Robert Kroc, as well as Chinese poets. As a poet, he represented Cyprus in the European Literature Night 2018 in Netherlands as a part of the Forum on European Culture program that brings together renowned authors. His latest collection of poems, with the title Liquid Glass, is published by Gutenberg in November 2020. Thank you very much, Kostas Gouliamos, for your presence here in our festival.
Thank you, Mr. Triandafylos Kotopoulos. So, let's start. Welcome, everyone. Mr. Gouliamos, Kostas, Nikolaidis, Panagiotis, Christodoulides, Yiorgos, Aligizakis, Manolis, Eva Gallud, Anne, Caldwell, Andrew, Melrose, Jen Webb, Alexandre, Mexis, Debasish, Parashar, Shakhawat, Tipu. Welcome, everyone. Can you hear us? Can you hear us, please?
Yes, they can hear us.
Yes. Yeah, I can hear.
Welcome. So, let's start with Gouliamos Kostas. welcome Mr. Gouliamos Kostas. Can you hear us?
Hi.
We hope you are well.
Yeah, thank you.
So, you can read your poem.
I will read a poem from my latest collection of poems that have been published last November. Under the title «Έφνης ασώματο σκοτάδι». Θανατερή δίνει, γυμνό λεπίδι του μύθου. Σαν ξύπνησε ο έγκλειστος και άνοιξε την πέτρα και έμαθε πως ο ήλιος πληθαίνει σε ξένους τόπους. Γλιστρά και φεύγει στις ρεματιές. Σιλώνει της νύχτας στα καρφιά, των άστρων τους καθρέφτες. Αγγίζει τις ρητίδες αγαπημένων, καθώς βυθίζονται στο αόρατο φως. Ω ασάλευτο καλοκαίρι, στο στήθος της γυναίκας, τι γυρεύεις? Ο κόσμος φλέγεται στην αιωνιότητα της εικόνας, που κάρφωσε άξαφνα μια νύχτα ο Αναξίμανδρος στα στυλπνά μάτια της Καλυψός, όταν γύρευε το μελάνι του δάσου, στο βαθύ πύρου, στα γρήμια του ουρανού, ενώ ο κόσμος πέθαινε πιο λευκός ανάμεσα σε 2 κοιλάδες της Λομβαρδίας, πάλευε στο κίτρινο ποτάμι, στο νησί του Λουοιάν, κάτω από την έρημη γέφυρα του Γιαντσί, πριν κλείσουν τα μάτια τους οι μέλισσες και το ποταμόπλιο ξεχάσει τις αποσκευές της όμορφης κόρης, που ονειρεύεται όρθια στην κουπαστή το χιονισμένο σώμα της Ελλήνης, με την ίδια ταπεινότητα του καπετάνιου, που λαχταρά ένα κορμί σε κρυφό λιμάνι, ενώ τα άλογα τα κρίζουν στον ύπνο τους βαθιά, καθώς ο θάνατος αλλάζει. Ο θάνατος έχει αλλάξει. Τα δόντια της νύχτας έχουν αλλάξει. Όπως το σώμα αλλάζει και το σώμα έχει αλλάξει. Και ο αέρας θυμάται τα σκοτεινά μαντάτα στη ράθιμη ράχη του καλοκαιριού και το καλοκαίρι έχει αλλάξει. Δεν έρχεται πια να παγώσει τους κάμπους. Μόνο τα άστρα κολυμπούν ελεύθερα στη σκοτεινή ύλη, στις ρεματιές της αβύσσου, και το φως κατεβαίνει στις ρίζες του έλατου, λυτρώνει τους νόμους των ονείρων, των υδάτων τη στάση, το συγκεχημένο είναι του Χάιντεγκερ, τις μυστικές αφίξεις του Ζήνωνα, με την όμορφη κόρη ολόθερμη, σαν δάκρυ έγκαμου βίου, όταν το φως γίνεται μνήμη και το φεγγάρι βουλιάζει στη σκούνα του Κανάρι, και η θάλασσα ως ζήτημα συνήθειας ζυγώνει τις χιονισμένες κορυφές της Ανδρομέδας, και η λέξη κημητήρι κι αυτή έχει αλλάξει. Ρεμβάζει πέρα στους πέρα κάμπους, θαναντία γιγνώσκο, άγχος της ησυχίας, του πάθους άγχος, και το άγχος έχει αλλάξει. Τόσα χαμένα πουλιά στη ράχη της πατρίδας, και η πατρίδα άλλαξε. Ορφανή σε πυκνές λεωφόρους, ψυχούλα βαμμένη σε χρώματα αγάπης, και η αγάπη έχει αλλάξει. Και το χιόνι επιστρέφει στην έρημο του δωματίου, και το φως είναι οργισμένο, μανίο, θεήσιν, αόρατο φως, όταν σμίγει με το αίμα της κόκκινης επανάστασης που μας άφησε ορφανά, σαν το δίλημμα της Θεονόης για τον παντογνώστη πόλεμο, και ο πόλεμος έχει αλλάξει. Και οι ήρωες έχουν αλλάξει. Ταξιδεύουν χωρίς επιστροφή, ναυαγοί στην ίδια πατρίδα, και τριγύρω χαρούμενοι ηλίθιοι, αγρίμια γιωμάτα θλίψη, με θέατα αρμυρό πηγάδι, και τις νεαρές μητέρες σιωπηλές θυλάζουν στο παράθυρο με ένα φανάρι στο χέρι, και μαστών αμφέχας αιμών θρεπτήριων, κρυμμένος στις φωνές των νηπίων των περαστικών το μάτι, όπου το βλέμμα κρύβεται σε μία λέξη, όπως το απόγευμα που γδύνεται η σελήνη πίσω από τις παγωμένες λεμονιές στο άγρυπνο σώμα του νεροφύλακα, ενώ κρατά το αερικό της νύχτας, και οι εκφυλισμένες τάξεις τρέμουνε με τη χαρά της αταξίας και το χορό του ζαλόμου, ενώ το φεγγάρι επιμένει να κρύβεται στου ουρανού το τραύμα.
Thank you so much, Mr. Gouliamos. Now you can introduce yourself in our panel.
Thank you. My name is Kostas Gouliamos, not Goulialmos. Anyway, I'm a poet mostly, but I cannot live from poetry. Therefore, I have to do my professorship duties at European University Cyprus. I'm elected rector over there, and also I'm elected ordinary member of the European Academy of Sciences and Arts. I'm most pleased to coordinate this session of eminent poets from 8 countries, notably from Cyprus, Canada, Spain, France, Australia, United Kingdom, India, and Bangladesh. I would like to warmly welcome each one in the 3rd International Festival of Poets.
Kostas, allow me only to clarify that from Patras we are following the whole conversation with a great interest.
That's great. Okay. Yes, please.
Thank you. So we will see you later. Next poet is Panagiotis Nikolaidis. Panagiotis Nikolaidis is a poet and literary critic and works as a philologist in secondary education. He has published the poetry collection Mirror Like a Lamp, 60 haikus on wine and poetry, 1 on the white and 2 on the black. Sonata about abstraction and the Bridge of July. He has also published the studies in contemplation and in dream, thoughts on 2 poems and 2 essays by Theodosis Nicolaou, Elena Toumazi, Rebellina. Finally, he participated as an editor with Yiorgos Christodoulides in the Anthology of Cypriot Poetry, 1960-2018. Mr. Panagiotis Nikolaidis, welcome. I hope you are well.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm very well in cloudy Nicosia in Cyprus. Thank you for the opportunity of being here today and taking part in this very interesting discussion. And I think afterwards we will have the opportunity to say very interesting things.
To hear your poem.
Το δεύτερο ποίημα έχει γραφτεί μέσα στον εγκλισμό, μέσα στις συνθήκες πανδημίας και έχει τον τίτλο «Μανιφέστο αποτυχίας». Είναι αφιερωμένο στον αγαπητό φίλο από την Κύπρο, ποιητή Γιώργο Χριστοδουλίδη. Μανιφέστο αποτυχίας. Και ξαφνικά το χρήμα δεν χρησιμεύει πια σε τίποτα. Ούτε οι έξυπνες βόμβες του στρατού, ούτε ο τρυπημένος ουρανός γεμάτος κάμερες και δορυφόρους. Φαίνεται πως η φύση πήρε τον λόγο και θα τον έχει για καιρό, καθώς μας πνίγουν ολοένα οι στέγες των μεγάλων μας σπιτιών και αυτός ο φόβος ο βαθύς, πως θα πεθάνουμε από κάτι τόσο απλό ενώ δαμάσαμε όλα τα είδη στον πλανήτη. Γι' αυτό λοιπόν πετάμε μόνο με ψηφιακούς χαρταετούς ότι χτίζουμε μας γκρεμίζει πιο πολύ. Αφού το βαθύτερο νόημα δεν είναι πια να μετικήσουμε στον Άρη τη σελήνη κάπου αλλού, αλλά να δούμε τη ζωή αλλιώς, με τις φυλακισμένες μας αισθήσεις. Έξω στον κήπο όμως κοκκινίζουν πάλι τ' άνθη της ροδιάς και τα σπουργίτια χορεύουν σάλσα μες στο φως, σαν εσωτερικοί μετανάστες του εφήμερου. Έτσι απλά, αδέλφια, νικά πάντα η ζωή, καθώς οι φλόγες μεταφέρουν κομμάτια της απαντρακωμένης μας ψυχής στον ατελείωτο ημαντά του χρόνου. Ευχαριστώ.
Dear Panagiotis, could you be kind enough to say a few words about last night, cause as far as I know, something important happened last night.
Yes, it was the...
And we have to congratulate you.
Thank you so much for the prize of the best poetic collection of 2019. It was an honor for me. It was an honor for my poetic generation, the poetry that is written today in Cyprus. And it's an honor for all Cyprus and all the poetry from this island, which is a part of Greek poetry. Because we speak Greek, we are Greek Cypriots. And thank you for the love and the appreciation you showed me and all of us.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Nikolaidis, I would like you to tell us a few words about yourself.
I'm 47 years old. I work as a professor in secondary education. I teach Greek literature. I'm a poet and a literary critic. I started writing from school when I was in the Lyceum. I enjoy reading poetry a lot, which is, I think, very close to writing poetry, because reading is very, very important. You have to read a lot of things. You have to read good poetry. And I think that's enough.
Thank you. We will see you later. Next poet is Yiorgos Christodoulides. Yiorgos Christodoulides, born in Moscow in 1968, raised in Larnaca, Cyprus, holder of an MA in journalism. He works as a journalist in Nicosia. His debut work, Enia, was awarded the State Prize for Young Writers. His second, Dream Mill, received the State Prize for Poetry. He has published 8 poetry collections. He is the co-editor of the Anthology of Cyprus Poetry, published by Kima. Christodoulides' poetry was included in the Anthology of European Poetry Grand Tour, moderated by the German Academy for Language and Literature. Welcome. We hope you well.
Good morning from Nicosia. I would like to thank the organizers for the invitation and the opportunity to participate in such important cultural event. It's a pity that all these beautiful things take place from distance, and we don't have the opportunity to meet each other, to drink a cup of coffee or a glass of wine. But even though I observe almost all the events from the start, and I'm really astonished by the way that everything goes smooth. Although I know how difficult it is to organize such events from the internet. I salute all my colleagues or all the poets from different places in the world. And I would like to wish everybody health and creativity in poetry.
Thank you. Now let's listen to your poem.
Φυσιολογικό. Ο περίεργος που περνά μέσα από τις προσωρινές στρατοπεδεύσεις ξεπαγιασμένων κάτω από τα μεγάλα γιοφύρια της Νέας Υόρκης. Αυτός που είναι βιαστικός, επειδή έχει να κάνει πράγματα σημαντικά. Ο θεατής του μπάτσου του Λευκού, του μπάτσου σπέρμα της Κούκλουξ Κλάν, που ποδοπατάει μέχρι θανάτου ένα μαύρο στο λαιμό. Θέλω να γίνω σαν εσένα, Μαρία, Ελένη, Περσεφόνη, Μυρτώ, Μιλιά, Άρτεμις, που διήλθες από δίπλα μου φορτωμένη με όλες τις αναμνήσεις μου, που σχεδόν με άγγιξες περνώντας από δίπλα μου τις προάλλες στην οδό Αγίου Ιουστινιανού, φορτωμένη με μένα, γεμάτη με μένα στα μεδούλια σου, κάνοντας πως δεν με θυμάσαι.
Well, I don't really like to speak about myself, but I will respond. I write poetry from the age of 13, and most probably it's the most important things I do in life. I also work as a journalist in the CYPRUS News Agency. I like to discover new poems and new poets, searching always for good translations, and I like to read a lot, poetry especially. And as far as my profession concerned, sometimes I find myself to be inspired from things that happens every day in our daily reality, and they are being covered by me as a journalist. And sometimes these events, I notice that they penetrate my poetry. That's it.
Okay. We will see you later. Next poet is Mr. Aligizakis Manolis. Mr. Aligizakis Manolis will not join the meeting because he lives in Canada, so we will see his video with poems. First of all, Manolis Aligizakis, a Cretan-Canadian poet and author. He is the most prolific writer-poet of the Greek diaspora, with over 70 books published in more than a dozen different countries in 11 different languages. He was recently appointed an honorary instructor and fellow of the International Arts Academy and awarded a Master's for the Arts in Literature. He has written 3 novels and numerous collection of poetry, which are being released as published work. His article, poems and short stories in both Greek and English have appeared in various magazines, a newspaper in 9 countries. His poetry has been translated in 14 languages and has been published in book form or in magazine in various countries. His translation book, George Seferis Collecting Poems, was shortlisted for the Greek National Literary Awards and the highest literary recognition of Greece. Now, let's hear the poem.
Απόκριση. Μέσα στις καταιγίδας την κοσμοχαλασιά για μια ρογμή ελπίδας έψαξα για ένα καλοκαίρι και μες στον ήλιο να ποθώ κορμί γυναίκας με λαψό και λίο. Κι είπε μου ο βοριάς, στα γονικά σου τα σημάδια θα βρεις το μονοπάτι. Σκύψε με βλάβια το μάρμαρο και ανασήκωσε τη θαλπορή τους να γευτείς. Και ρώτησα το λίβα, λιακάδα πού θα βρω. Κι είπε μου, μέσα στην καρδιά σου κρύβεται.
Thank you for your poem and your video. Next poet is Eva Gallud. Eva Gallud, welcome.
Hello. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me, for this invitation to this wonderful festival.
We hope you are well.
Yes, everything's fine. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Eva Gallud is literary translator and writer. Among her translation can be found poets such as Emily Dickinson, Rupert Brooke, and narrators such as Edith Wharton, Kate Chopin. She has published 5 books of poems. She has recently published her first novel. Let's hear the poem.
Ella descose puntadas sobre los labios. La delicada tijera de plata hace crujir el cordel que amarra el grito. La descosedora no posee aguja. Con 2 dedos limpios y arrugados desplaza la piedra gigantesca ante la cueva. Revela la humedad de lo innombrado. No es su tarea la trabazón, ni dejar ciegos los pozos. La descosedora alumbra con el destello afilado de la hoja la profundidad real de la caverna. Allá se adentran las hermanas salvajes. A la luz de las palabras nuevas, escriben sus nombres sobre la roca.
Thank you, Mrs. Gallud. Now you can introduce yourself in our panel. Please.
Well, I'm a literary translator from English into Spanish. I'm writing poetry since I can remember. The only thing I remember from the beginning that it was a really bad poetry when I was a teenager. And with a lot of reading and a lot of work, my poetry has evolved, and now in places where it's normally not seen, and that is what I try to do with my poetry. And also my work as a translator has brought me close to some magnificent poet, and well, I think it also works for the best in my poetry. So, and thank you for having me.
You're welcome. You're welcome. We will see you later. Next poet is Anne Caldwell. Can you hear us? Welcome to our festival.
Thank you. I can hear you clearly.
We hope you are well.
Yes, very well, thank you.
Thank you. So, Anne Caldwell is a freelance writer and education specialist based in England. Her poetry she has She has worked for the British Council and is due to become a Royal Literary Fellow next year. Her specialism is prose poetry and she is a keen walker. Her poetry has appeared in arrays of anthologies and magazines in the UK and internationally. These include the Rialto Writing Woman, The North. Anne has published 3 collections including Painting the Spiral Staircase. Now let's hear the poem.
Hello everyone, my name is Anne Caldwell. I'm going to read you a couple of poems from my new collection of prose poetry, Alice and the North. The first poem is called The Slow Train North. Alice leaves King's Cross and loses her mobile signal. She sits in the quiet coach as it rumbles through the hinterlands of the capital. Flat terraced rows give way to avenues and semis with clipped privet. Here's the Lincolnshire flatlands, big skies, reed beds, wild ducks. Alice listens to the person opposite breathing, to the rhythm of the diesel engine and the whir of an old heater in the carriage. Her coat's heavy with it. There's her reflection, bunched up like a March hare, caught by headlights somewhere in the wolds. There's the warmth of her face against glass. The wash sprays salt through an open window, and that pull north is stronger than ever, the pole's magnetic embrace. Maybe she'll cradle a block of ice and rip the skin off her fingertips. But right now she's reading Louis MacNeice, and this is the slow movement, the pause between the opening and the closing, the allegro and the appassionato. This is where she sits, between the city and the icebergs, heat and that stretch of winter, no sun for 3 months. She's just passing, finding joy in the view from the window, wetlands alive with trout, fireflies dancing, rookeries chattering, and their offspring plump with love.
Thank you so much. Mrs. Caldwell, feel free to tell us a few words about yourself.
Thank you very much. I'm absolutely delighted to be here in such great company. I'm a lecturer at the moment in the UK for the Open University, and I've been collaborating in recent years with poets from all over the world because I've developed a real interest and passion in prose poetry. I think my work is based at the moment on the idea of place and a sense of place and identity. And my latest collection, Alice in the North, is based on a series of walks across the north of England and memories of travelling up into Scandinavia and across to America and other countries in the world. I do realise for people in Greece, the idea of north is very different to my own. But I'm delighted to be here.
We hope so. Thank you. We will see you later. Next poet now is Andrew Melrose. Welcome to our festival. Can you hear us?
I can hear you, yes, thank you.
Thank you.
I can hear you well.
Andy, may I interrupt you just for a moment? I'm Triandaphilos. I would like to say that our postgraduate program in creative writing in Greece owes a lot of things to you, so stay safe and next year be with us.
Thank you, Spiros. I'm looking forward to coming over.
Okay, so Andrew Melrose is Emeritus Professor of Writing at the University of Winchester. He has over 150 writing credits, including the Story Keepers film series and 33 books, as well as poems, songs, articles and chapters on writing. He is a co-editor of the journal Writing in Practice and international editor on Meniscus and Action, Creative Exploration. Let's hear the poem.
Hi there. Both these poems are part of a reflection
on growing up in Scotland with a coal mining father. The first one's called Swimming to Fife. Give me maps and a compass, some old bones, a bag full of shells, beach-washed pebbles, dried seaweed, a clear stretch of water, a sunny day and a view of the Bass Rock. It's okay, you can sleep off the night shift while I plan the journey. There's no rush, I'll not be far away. Even now I think of you every day. There will come a time when I won't, maybe later, when dusk settles over the Firth of Forth. I won't hear you asking, think we could swim to Fife for here? I always said, we never did, but that was okay.
Thank you for your poem. Now tell us a few words about yourself.
Well, yeah, I do write about myself, but I'm, in some ways I feel a bit of a fraud claiming to be a poet, because I'm not really a poet. I'm somebody who writes poetry along with other things, and so that particular poem comes from a very old-fashioned chapbook that I'm putting together at the moment, which is full of prose, poetry, pictures, and is going to have a musical CD attached to it as well. So I like to spread my writing out a little wider than just poetry. I don't consider myself to be a poet as such, which is the strange thing to say at a poetry festival, I know, but I'm a writer who writes poetry as well.
Thank you. We will continue the discuss later. So next poet is Jen Webb. Welcome. Can you hear us? Welcome to our festival.
I can hear you. Thank you.
We hope you are well.
Oh, very well. Thank you. Yeah.
So,
thank you for letting me.
Jen Webb is a Canberra-based poet who arrived here via South Africa, New Zealand, Canada, the Western Australia outback, and central Queensland. She is a professor at the University of Canberra, researching poetry, cultural theory, and creative practice. Her poems have been published in many local and international journals and have been anthologized and translated. She is also the author of 5 collections of poetry. Jen is co-editor of the Bilingual and volumes Open Windows, Contemporary Australian Poetry and Writing the Pacific, and of the journal Meniscus and Action, Creative Exploration. Now we are ready to hear the poem.
I wrote this poem earlier this year during the catastrophic fires that were raging across Australia. And in response to the fires and to the distress it was causing across the country, I thought the science of kindness might be an answer to what was plaguing us. It's 1 minute before the scheduled departure time, and she is running up the stairs and across the bridge and down, and as her left foot hits the platform, the train is there. Someone helps her on board. Someone moves up to make room. The doors close. She'll be home within a few hours, fires permitting, with no clear idea of what's waiting for her there. The train rolls through the suburbs and out into the wilds. The cat in her bag is working its way free, and the sun is going down, a silhouette against the flames, and the moon is coming up, red on red. Her phone turns itself off, and she places it gently in her pocket, lies back in her seat, closes her eyes.
Thank you, Jen Webb. Can you introduce yourself in our panel, please?
Of course. Well, I'm a poet, as I said. I'm an academic who teach and research the philosophy of creative practice. And I mostly work on the connections between creativity and human rights, creative practice and human suffering. And I'm like a number of other poets in this group, I've been passionate about poetry since I was tiny. And in fact, my very first poem was published in Afrikaans about my horse when I was like 9 or 10 years old. And then as a teenager, I wrote masses of really terrible poetry, and I've been working at it since. And I'm a prose poet like Anne, and like Eva, I'm really interested in the beauty of ordinary things, including the beauty of sorrow. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We are so happy. So next poet is Alexandre Mexis. Welcome. Welcome to our festival.
Hello. Γεια σας.
Γεια σας.
Thank you for... I'm very happy to be here.
We hope you are well.
Yes. Everything fine. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Alexandre Mexis is a French author of poems, plays, short stories and short films. He is also a painter and an English teacher and lecturer specialist in English literature. His collection of poetry includes Eros and Thanatos in reference to Freud, Un été grec, a trip to Greece through poems, drawing and watercolors and chimeras, words that sway and capsize to the rhyming of life, carefully touching every moment to better grasp its beauty. In 2020, he has a charcoal and pastel exhibition, Mythos, on Greek mythology, and released his new short film, Mustang. Now, let's hear the poem.
Sous les yeux d'Hélène. Sous les yeux d'Hélène, les batailles de Bouboulina ou les mégots de Mélina, c'est le même soleil qui brûle l'été et réchauffe l'hiver. La même mer qui prend les marins et amuse les enfants. Les mêmes cigales qui crissent aux oliviers. La même Grèce que je veux te faire aimer.
Thank you for your poem. Can you introduce yourself in our panel, please?
Yeah, sure, thank you. First, I'm very happy to be here with you, especially because as you can see in my poem and in the things that I said before, my granddad was Greek and I'm of Greek origin, so it's a real honor for me to be here. I live in the south of France, where I teach English in secondary school and at university, especially English literature. And poetry is one of the things I do, along with writing short stories, scripts for short films, and also painting, as you mentioned. But poetry is also the thing that I really started when I was young, along with painting and drawing. And my poems deal with probably the simple things in life, the simple things you can have in everyday life. Mainly, I'm interested in showing that there is beauty and sensibility in all things. And that's it. Thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful. We will see you later. So, next poet is Debasish Parashar. Can you hear us? Welcome, welcome.
Namaste.
We are so happy
I
to
can
be
hear
here.
you. Thank you, thank you.
Thank you. We hope you are well.
Yes, I am doing well. Hope you all are doing well too. Safe and sound.
Okay, so Debasish Parashar is a poet, singer, musical based in New Delhi, India. He is an assistant professor of English literature at the University of Delhi. Parashar is the founder and editor-chief at Vitem Speaks literary journal and in associated with the world poetry movement. With his debut song, Pamarumana, Debasish became one of the first Indian singers who dared to experiment with the idea of fusing 500 years old Borgets of Assam with Western conventions of the Kshatras. Debasish Parashar was honored with the festival character for interpretation award at the India Pro Poet 2020 International Literary Festival. Parashar has been translated into more than 30 world languages. So let's hear the poem.
Namaste. The title of the poem is To My Grandfather. Decades back, when I was not even born, my grandfather Hiranath died an unnatural death. It was an unusually bright summer day. Unlike on other days, he did not carry sweets for all. His hands had long, long blue veins. He walked back home in quick steps with an old black Mahendra Datta umbrella in his hand to the scorching heat. His body was found hanging against the sun. In the shades of an old banyan tree, notorious for its robust growth, noisy ghosts and impeccable memories. Choric voice. It was a suicide. Nobody blamed the ghosts. Choric voice. Condemnable for a Brahmin. Nobody questioned the village. Choric voice. No funerals for unnatural deaths. Nobody appeased the dead. Choric voice. Nobody pollutes by empathy. Nobody challenged the body. Choric voice, leave them alone. Nobody challenged the spectators with shared blood. Choric voice, no last rites. Nobody challenged the Agni that burns. My grandfather's daughter carried her father's corpse on a wooden cart for miles. The dead man probably cried for company on his last journey too. His weight could not purify the cart. His body was thrown into the waters of Bhugdoi. His flesh twisted like tradition into a curve. A golden fish jumped through his eyes. For years, everyone talked about everything, just not about the dead man's mind. What was left of his body was only his black umbrella leaning against the bokul tree opposite the village temple under leopard shades of the sun. The day my grandfather died, my father was not in town. His absence was long overdue. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Wonderful.
Most welcome.
Can you tell us a few words about yourself, please? To introduce
thank you so much. Thank you so much. I am Debasish Parashar. I am an assistant professor of English literature in a South Campus college under Delhi University. I stay in Delhi, but I am born and brought up in the scenic northeastern state of Assam. I'm a singer-musician too. For good pastime, I compose songs, I sing, and I record those in my home setup. I love writing poetry. I think because I'm in the process of becoming a poet, and I don't know how long it goes on. Maybe it is a lifelong process, you know. So I'm really happy to be here. I sincerely thank Professor Triantafyllos and the organizing committee members for inviting me to this beautiful event. My warm regards to all my wonderful fellow participants and poets reading in today's event. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much too.
Welcome.
So next poet is Shakhawat Tipu. Welcome. Can you hear us? Welcome to our event. Please open your microphone. I can't hear you. One minute. Please open your microphone. It's closed.
Hello.
Now, okay. We are ready.
Okay.
Welcome
thank you
again.
so much. All my friends, poets and fellows. I am so happy today. Thank you for invitation to the third Patras World Poetry Festival. Such a beautiful festival is really blessing in the time of pandemic crisis. So nice. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Shakhawat Tipu, born in 1971 in Dhaka. He is a poet, essayist, and editor from Bangladesh. Tipu established himself as a leader poet of his generation. His poems have been translated in Greek, Spanish, Italian, Serbian, Slovenian, and English. He has published 7 titles of poems and a book on a famous Bengali sculptor and her works. His poems appeared in many magazines and anthologies around the world. So let's hear the poem.
হাইডেগারের ছুরি বস্তুর এমন দাম নেই যেন ভাব হয়ে বসে থাকে সবকিছু কিছু ছেড়ে দিয়ে যেন দুনিয়ার সব ভাষা হিনুকুণ্ডুলি পাকিয়ে গুম হচ্ছে অচেনা কোথায় ভাষা মাত্রই মৌন একদম চুপচাপ খুনির মতন কখন সামনে আর কখন পেছনে বলাই বাহুল্য এই যে ঘাতক বর্ণমালা লালাভাই ফুটছে গলায় এমন করুণ আজ ডাকাতের পাশে ডাকাতিনি তবু কেউ তো কারো ভাষা কেন যে বোঝে না বাড়ির ভেতর হাড়ি আর জানালার বাইরে দরজা মৃত পাখি সামনে রেখেই বসেছে রুগ্ন যুদ্ধবাজ তার কোনো ভাষা নেই যেন এক অদ্ভুত সময় নিখিলের দিকে যারা যায় তারাও ফিরছে না মাঝে মাঝে ভয়ে কুকড়ে কাঁপছে শহরের কবুতর অচেনা ভয়ের পর অমৃতদের ভাষা বোঝা ভার যেন তাবৎ বেকুব দার্শনিক তসবির মতো নিরক্ষর সব ভাষা বাড়ি ফেরে কেবলই বাংলা ফেরে না ফিরলেও ভাষা থাকে না সে আরেক আজব ঘটনা যা ঘটে তা তো ভাষায় কেন তার যে অর্থ হয় না
Thank you so much. Now feel free to tell us a few words about yourself.
Thank you. Have a good news. Another good news for me. Today, my Bengali haiku collection has been published, which is Bengali title is Papurno, and English title is Sin and Virtue. Thank you all my friends. Greeting from Bangladesh. I'm a poet, translator, editor, and critical thinker from Bangladesh. I'm a prominent figure of new Bengali poetic language movement. My poem translated in Spanish, Italian, Greek, Serbian, Slovenian, Nepalese. I have published 7 poetry books, an art critic book, about our great sculptor, Nobra Ahmed. I have edited Jatiya Sahitya, a magazine of linguistics and philosophy, and Charal Lamai, a collection of street people interview with a subaltern dictionary. I am a former acting editor, literary magazine in Notundhara, and former editorial consultant and art magazine Depart. I am working a journalist. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I must have your poems are wonderful, honestly. We are so happy for this poetry festival. So, at this time, I would like to inform you that the first part of our event is over. So, as to move to the next part, I would like to hear Mr. Gouliamos. Please.
Okay, thank you very much. Distinguished poets, the world is facing a confluence of major crises that threaten the survival of humanity, of interculturalism, and particularly liberty. We cannot overlook the fact that we are in a unique moment of human history. Humans have been on Earth for a few 100,000 years. We are an astonishing miracle, the result of many pure accidents, so to speak. However, for the first time in 4 billion years on Earth, we are the first generation in human history to face the question, will human civilization survive in any recognizable form? Dear friends, the major debate lies in whether the new media technologies is destroying poetry. There is ongoing debate on how technology can be seen as a source of corrupting a literary art. In addition, modern poetry faces threats of plagiarism, repetitiveness, being cliché, transient, and a pathway to future lawsuits. In any case, the process of writing poetry begins with a struggle to describe what is not easily captured in words, but is put down in words that create associations in the mind and emotions of the reader. It requires a keen multi-sensory experience of the surrounding world, an ability to make both logical and intuitive connections, a passion for finding just the right word or the right phrase to express what at first might seem inexpressible. As Jane Hirschfeld pointed out in her book, 10 Widows, How Great Poems Transform the World, poetry's work is not simply the recording of inner or outer perception. It makes by words and music new possibilities of perceiving. At this moment, allow me to start a discussion with you by providing a couple of questions relevant to the context and content of poetry and, of course, to your poetry as well. So I will start, with the first question. Today, postmodernism is considered as a reproduction of traditions. However, poets continually attack conventional boundaries and subvert the very forms they appropriate. What do you consider as conventional boundaries in our epoch, and particularly in your poetry? So allow me to ask each of you, starting from Mr. Panagiotis Nikolaidis from Cyprus.
Morning again to all. Nice to hear your poems. And thank you for this opportunity to share my poem and my thoughts about this subject and the question you raised, Mr. Gouliamos, about poetry in the era of COVID-19. My first observation, and I think you also, Mr. Gouliamos, said it, this current pandemic warns humanity, which is deeply blinded by its technological power and destroys everything without reason and ethics, that we're heading with mathematical accuracy to self-destruction. Furthermore, while reading many poems referring to the pandemic, I could not pinpoint a common political reference. And this, I would like to hear what my fellow poets think about it. Instead, I sense a common social sensitivity which explores the trauma of COVID-19 in the digital era of globalization. Poetry, though, in the era of the pandemic seems to distance itself from any political or ideological frame. In this existential context, personal crisis raises essential artistic questions, which in this case result into poems. And I think these social references, which are logically more intense in this era because of the economic crisis and the pandemic, are combined, and now I think I answered to your question, Mr. Gouliamos, not always successfully with the search of new forms or with destroying the form and the conventional boundaries. Sometimes we see the verse, the try of the verse to be more simple, direct, and to come closer to oral speech. But on the other hand, we see a very close connection to tradition and to more conventional forms. We see both of them. I think that this to find conventional boundaries or not is not the question. I think what we must look is to find poetry in every attempt, which I think we can see in many poems that are very good about this subject. So having this in mind, I don't think that the role of poetry in the middle of this powerful pandemic changes. I think it remains the same. On the one hand, poetry reflects both the social and the personal internal reality of the poet, and simultaneously transcends these two realities and voices the collective, the timeless, and the universal. Poetry in this hard period confirms that it exists to remind us that we are human, and that poets write not only for understanding others, but mainly to explore and to understand themselves. And
okay. Yeah, please.
And this certainly is not an attempt to get away from reality, but I think it's the only way to confront social reality through another lens than the one
reality violently tries to impose it to us.
Okay, thank you very, very much. The same type of question applies to all of you, and I would like to continue our conversation by getting Yiorgos Christodoulides' response. Yiorgos, please.
Thank you, Kostas. Well, I would start saying that last night, very late night, I wrote a poem. It says that my children, I have 4, they ask me questions all the time. And the poem ends like this. The day that I will tell them that I have no answers to your questions, my children will consider me wise. It's difficult to find answers in a world that is going crazy. Everything I'm going to say now, I consider it controversial, but I will express some point of views. I believe that humankind will be eliminated if and when human beings become unable to give and receive love. Due to the pandemic and the restrictions imposed by the authorities and the governments, this human necessity is now impossible, at least with the terms we knew. Bonds between people become thinner due to the social distancing measures. Fear is everywhere while crossing the streets. In the professional environment, with colleagues, with our own family, with friends, people avoid to meet you. You do the same. It's an unprecedented phenomenon. It's something extra logical. So far, we used to see it in cinematography, in science fictions, but now it has become our reality, daily reality. So poetry, I think, should reflect this new state of human affairs the world entered. The glorification of the discipline to the restrictions. They tell you that if you want to be a good civilian, you have to obey. This may be right, but in terms of poetry, poetry is based on the demonstrations, on the best demonstrations of free spirit. So from the perspective of poetry, it's actually unacceptable. Necessary maybe for the authorities, for the people to confront with COVID-19, but very disappointing from the point of view of fundamental human rights and how this extends to poetry. At the same time, we have the self-sacrifice efforts of the medical and nursing personnel everywhere in the hospitals, and they're saving people. Very often they get infected from COVID. And definitely this concerns poetry, because poetry should give voice to all these unprecedented events we witness every day from now almost 1 year ago, and it goes on and goes on. This is my thoughts.
Okay, thank you very, very much, George. To a great extent, you know, that the COVID accelerated existing forms of crisis that were since 1970 or so. But now, you know, with the COVID, with the pandemic, you know, we are in a process of a continuous type of crisis, anyway, that affects to a great extent all forms of arts, including, of course, poetry or so. I like to have the response of Ms. Eva Gallud
Yes, hello.
Hola.
Hola. Well, I think that poets are always concerned. One of the main concerns of the poet is to get to the universal through personal experience and personal expression of those experiences. I think the pandemic has made clear that globalization that was assumed to be a good thing some years, some decades before, is not so good, and that we are connected in a more deeper than we thought, and that everything affects everyone, and we are not seen as isolated individuals anymore, or we are not felt. I do not feel myself as isolated as I was before. I feel more connected to the rest of the world. That I think that is a positive way. That is a positive thing, but has come to me through a very negative situation, that is the pandemic. So in a way, we are more conscious and aware of that link. We are linked, and we are all vulnerable to one thing that can affect every part of the world. It's not one country or one continent or anymore. It's all the world affected by one same thing. And this experience for sure will affect our future expressions in the poetic, because the confinement, the loneliness, the restrictions, the anxiety, the illness, this all has left a scar, on a global scar, and sooner or later, and more or less consciously, it will appear in our poetry at some extent, at some point. Some of you are already writing about this, and some others are, in my case, still processing these events and trying to find the words and the way to talk about it in poetry.
Thank you very much, Eva. There was and still is a discourse on the era of post-humanism. And at this point, at this period, COVID brought us front of this huge, I would say, issue that again affects, our thought as well as our writings, also, particularly in the sphere of prose, of poetry, and so on. I'd like to ask Dr. Anna Caldwell for her response.
Thank you. I really enjoyed hearing what people have said so far on this subject of poetry in this really, really difficult time. I think my experience this year has been one where poetry has come to the fore in my life. I've seen it as a very healing force and a space to express fears. I think because I've been teaching throughout the pandemic since March, I've been reading lots of students writing on the subject from all over Europe and further afield. And what struck me is that poetry is a form that's short and pithy and able to hold the things we find most difficult to say. So it's a vehicle for being able to talk about the things that are really impossible to express, I would say, in any other form. I've launched a book in this pandemic, and I've taught on Zoom for a full week. I'm a little bit zoomed out, to be honest. If I'm weary of the way that we're having to work virtually, but I've also, like Eva, seen it as a huge advantage because I've been connecting with people throughout the world, quite frankly, and this festival is an example of this. I've got a lovely quote here from a New Zealand poet called Bill Manhire, who's just produced a book called Wow, and his final poem in that collection is called A Little Prayer. What he says is, "Let there be tasks we undertake. Let us make what we can make." And in a world in crisis, I think that's a very, very human response to the situation that we find ourselves in. Just in terms of answering your question about genre and boundaries, I think the work I've done in prose poetry has challenged more traditional genres and ways of writing. And I've seen it like improvisational music. But this comes on the back of having written sonnets for 2 years solidly just before that. So I did feel the need to release these shackles of poetry.
Okay. Oh, thank you very, very much. I like also to connect, the question or the problematic that we discuss with forms of reading of poetry. In other words, I like to enter the field of readership by reminding to us what Octavio Paz has noted long time ago. He was saying that the poem is an original and a unique creation, but it is also reading, participation. So how do you think, Professor Adriu Melrose, about this? And of course, connecting it, to the pandemic and the question that I provided previously.
I think the connection and connection to the whole idea of writing and reading, connecting to the pandemic, has allowed us to look at a couple of things which I think in the 21st century we started to forget, which is that to write poetry is simple. You need a pencil and a piece of paper, and the simplicity of it, the simplicity of life that we can kind of hold on to. But the other thing that's had a big impact, I think, it's had a big impact on me, is that life's still going on. I live on the south coast of England, and we have the English Channel between here and France, and we still have forced migrants crossing the Channel, just looking for a better life. The whole world, there's a whole world who've been looking for a better life for centuries, really, and now we have an opportunity to reflect as well. We're reflecting on a situation that we've stumbled into in a way called a pandemic, and we're beginning to share some of the problems that people have been having for decades, centuries, in some ways. So I think the poet's connection is that we're beginning to be able to connect the whole idea of strife, the whole idea of struggle, the whole idea of suffering, the whole idea that we're quite comfortable in our lives in a real way. And in some sense, the poet has to kind of give voice to the fact, and we can't forget the fact that the other problems of the world are continuing at the same time as this extra problem is going on. And I feel quite strongly about the difficulties we're facing with COVID, and at the same time kind of forgetting sometimes that there is still a struggle going on somewhere else.
Fully understood. I share with you, the same perspective. Thank you very, very much. The time that you were showing us, the pencil and the paper came to my mind. Pages from the Finnegan's Wake by James Joyce, when he was imagine a world, with new technologies and so on. Also, what exactly T.S. Eliot was telling about the type machine. That he believed that the introduction in those days, in the first quarter of 20th century, will change, the structure, the aesthetics, the form of poetry. And he was absolutely right. Now we have new technologies, new media technologies that create differences and shifts within society, and of course within the expression, the aesthetics, the type, the forms of poetry or so. I like to have Miss Webb's response, to our discussion, to our discourse.
Thank you. Look, I agree with what you said at the beginning. This is a truly catastrophic period of history, and it does seem as though we're trembling on the edge of extinction. But if we read history, we know there have been a lot of periods in the whole record of human habitation when our ancestors felt the same way, that we were at the end of everything. And each time, with every new catastrophe, humans have been left shaken, quite often very grossly reduced in population size with massive deaths, to face. But we've always found new ways to live in the world, new ways to use science and philosophy and technology. And then we start the process of breaking everything all over again, exploiting the environment, exploiting other people, forgetting everything we share. Yiorgos talked about human existence being predicated on our capacity to love. And I absolutely agree with that, where love means empathy and care and willingness to share. I think that's wonderful. So for those of us down here in the South, because I'm an awfully long way away from many of you, the pandemic has not been as devastating as it has for you in the North. The numbers of deaths are minimal compared with Europe and Americas. But we live in islands, of course, and so we can simply keep everybody away. And we have small populations, so we aren't bumping up against each other so much. But it has reminded us how very far away we are from everybody else in the world. And what I'm seeing around Australia, New Zealand, and the islands is a deep anxiety about what happens next. Very real sadness, great sense of loneliness, and a sense of deep loss. And for us here in Australia, it's been compounded by the catastrophic fires we had in summer and hailstorms and cyclones and floods. And it feels very much as though the environment is punishing us. The planet is punishing us for our bad behavior. We've been sent to our rooms to stay there until we improve our behavior. That's kind of what it feels like. So I live in hope that as we come to the end of the pandemic, and of course it only lasts a couple of years usually, that we won't do what we've done in history. We won't simply go back to where we were before and be just as nasty to the environment, to each other. But when it comes to the changing forms of poetry, and we break the boundaries of the tradition, well, poetry is a living form. It emerges from lived experience, from the embodied poets, how they breathe, how they speak, how they see the world. And it's also an experience of all of us share. Metaphor is what human beings always reach for in times of heightened emotion. And poetry is the perfect vehicle for metaphor, if you can call a metaphor and vehicle the same word. And I think this is really important. We can see in the United States how many people have refused to acknowledge that the pandemic actually exists. And this is extraordinary. But human beings can live very easily with cognitive dissonance. We're very good at ignoring the actuality of the world. And here I think it's where new forms of poetry can be of real value because they surprise readers. It doesn't look like a poem, or it doesn't sound like a poem. It doesn't do the things that we expected of a poem. And that grabs the attention of people and shakes them for a minute. And I think surprise is a really, really good way of getting attention and getting people to refocus and to look at things just a little bit different. So I hold out hope for new forms.
Oh, thank you very much. Definitely, we live in an age of rapid transformations. due to digital technologies, and in our time due to pandemia, to COVID-19 or so. And can poetry have the same impact it had in other times? I like to have the response of Alexandre. Do you hear me, Alexandre?
Thank you. Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, good. Thank you for your answers. I agree with what everyone has said so far. It's all very interesting. I think that we've said a lot, but there's a difference with the now and poetry in the past times. I think I'm talking about the moments men had to face, the most terrible moments, such as the wars. In a war, we are facing other humans, and the evil comes directly from other humans, which I think is maybe even more terrible to bear. Maybe the beginning of the pandemic is caused by disrespect we show towards the nature, towards animals. I think that the approach, the vision we can have here is a bit different. We're not facing ourselves as humans, and poetry can help a lot by making us understand that it's not just a matter of surviving towards ourselves. I think that we can find in everyday life, and even in our confined lives, in the lockdowns we have experienced everywhere in the world, that it's not. It's difficult for everyone, but it's not as difficult, I think, as when we were in times of war.
Thank you very much, Alexandre. To a great extent, and by capitalizing on your thought, on your dimensions, and in particular on George Christodoulides' notion of love, and Panagiotis Nikolaidis on social factors, I wanted to ask Tipu to tell or correlate on new possibilities of perception, new possibilities of perceiving, the existence, the environment that we have, which is front of us anyway. Is Mr. Tipu here listening?
Hello,
Yes.
hear me?
Yes. Okay.
Thank you, my friend. First, the epidemic has broken the normal human relationships. Second, man has become helpless as any other creature in nature. Third, men becoming more lonely and lonelier to survive the epidemics. In fact, man is able to realize his existence is like a leaf of a tree falling in a little wind. It is very painful for us. I think in the pandemic time, man is nobody. Capitalism, most of all, destroyed our everyday life, our political condition, our democracy, and else. Those who will survive now there are new people. As a result, we have to think anew in the new reality of the new human world. Poetry is just like that. Melancholy, depression, and captivity have changed people's behavior. Relationship, psychology, language, and other activities. So the new reality of deep snuff will give birth to new poems. At first, I also write a poem at the shaking time of pandemic. The poem title is Poisonous Corona Flower. The poem is published in several languages. It was translated into Greek by my great friend and poet Maria Andradelli, which is also published in Exitude magazine. Whatever, the time is now. The celebrate our silence, and the creativity of poems must break that silence. We lead our new world to new creations. Thank you, my friend.
I like to thank you very, very much. The way that you phrase, the whole notion of perception and creation also brings to me, the next question, that is, how do poets' lives and perceptions under perpetual crisis, any type of crisis, from capitalist crisis to biopolitical crisis like the pandemic right now, influence the poetry? I like to have the response of Parashar.
Thank you so much. According to me, if we look at the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, then they are manifold. There are positives as well as negatives, right? When we consider its relationship to poetry and different art forms. There are negatives, then I will go to the positives because, first, let us start with what are the bad impacts. For example, there is an increasing sense of isolation, of course, and the live interactions are missing. Earlier, people used to go together, go out and read out together poems. That, that kind of interaction is now missing. Even as a professor, I feel that, sense of loss when I teach my students. There's that that sense of live interaction is missing. And the same applies to poetry and poetry readings. Although the digital age has, to some extent, made these readings possible, but the live interactions are different. That that emotions that we share through live interactions, those are different. There's another thing, because of the prolonged period of lockdown, we are stuck at home. And because of the same, we are increasingly dependent on the digital platforms. So somehow, because of this increasing dependency, the sacrosanct nature of art and poetry, which maybe in terms of Adorno and the Frankfurt School, I would like to call it the demise of the aura of art, right? Aura of poetry, which is increasingly, dying. So poetry is increasingly consumer-oriented and is increasingly governed by the market forces. If I take the example of Instagram poetry, Insta poetry, now it is not simply the content of poetry that matters for people, for the readers, young readers, but also the resolution of the graphics that is going on Instagram. It is the resolution that defines the size of poetry, the length of poetry. It is the graphics. It is more about the appearance, right? So people, a good poem is not simply the one which is written well. A good poem is also the one which looks well for them. So we have to keep those negative impacts in mind. But there are many positives which I noticed. Of course, different societies responded differently to this global phenomenon or global pandemic. If I talk about the Indian societies, the impacts are a little bit different, which I noticed here. There are many poets who do not consciously write poetry. The prolonged period of lockdown have made people look inside and recover those creative instincts which, they have long been unaware of. They have started writing, they've started singing, they are dancing, they're posting videos of their dancing, cooking, and they are nourishing all sorts of creative instincts here because they're stuck at home, and the digital medium, the social media, it has provided that, much needed platform to them. If we look at the larger work culture, there's always a sense of alienation from the final product and the process of production. But now, at least people are happy with the kind of recognition they are getting for their creative output, even although it's through the virtual medium, but they are happy. It is giving a sense of recognition to them. So they are happy about it. Social media and the virtual space has emerged more as a powerful and significant medium during this ongoing crisis. The term, which should have been is actually physical distancing. It was termed as social distancing, and it led to the rise of a kind of emotional distancing and also psychological distancing. If we look carefully, then there's a broader and latent framework of psychological disaster management through the digital medium, which emerged during the pandemic, because people have found creative outlets through the virtual platforms, right? There's a third thing which I noticed about it. And the third thing is that, there is an increasing interest in personal narratives, in life narratives. For example, recently I was part of this project called Life in Quarantine, which is undertaken by the University of Stanford. So they are collecting and curating narratives from different parts of the world about the pandemic experience. So these documents, these projects can in the future can become chronicles of the times we are living in. And the last point that I would like to mention, it is specific to Indian literary scenario. Because of the digital platforms, because of the social media platforms, there are many young emerging poets, even including me, we are able to showcase our works and we are able to pass on the works to different places across the world. Otherwise, that space is always prone to certain, dominant hierarchies and, social structures of perception, which are somehow broken by the pandemic. So there is a sense of hope, but we cannot ignore the negative impacts of social media as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Parashar. It's quite interesting, the research project that you told us about collecting different narratives regarding the experience of COVID around the world by Stanford University in the United States.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So, that responds to a great extent, to the existing, I would say, to the experiences. However, we have to find out, literary communities, social communities, anyway, the humanity, how we have not just responded to COVID, but also how we express new types of emotions. Because COVID created, by definition, new types of emotions. I mean, the notion of love is different as used to be in the past. The notion of communication is not the same anymore. Okay, of course, the roots are there, the veins, are there, but the way that we experience the crisis, which is, I consider this crisis as continuation of other crises, of capitalist, as I said, crisis, has changed the way that we think, the way that we feel, the way that we make love, the way that we communicate, and so on and so on. Definitely has affected, the type of poetry's writing also. Just to close, the session, I like to have your response, but very, very fast, if it's possible. What, according to your opinion, distinguishes at this particular period poetry from prose? We have to be very fast, to this because time is limited to us. We have less than 10 minutes. Who likes to respond to it? Eva?
Hello again.
Yeah, I ask this type of question because also, the notion of time is different, that,
yes.
And Tipu also referred, to his poem in Heidegger, if I remember quite well. Okay.
Well, quickly, I'll try to be very, very quick. I think poetry reaches to places where prose, non-poetic prose, cannot reach, and it also comes from those places. So we can explore new ways of communication. Now that we cannot communicate in the same way, we cannot touch each other, we cannot see each other. We have to reach the other and to try to touch and communicate with new words, with new ways of communication beyond boundaries.
Thank you. Who else likes to respond to it? Andrew? Okay, and Eva. Eva already, yeah. Andrew?
I'm not sure I can respond to this really because I think, I'm muted now. I'm not sure I can respond to it simply because I find the boundary between prose and poetry is a very, very thin line, really. And if a line exists, I think we move seamlessly between one and the other. And as Jen Webb and Caldwell mentioned earlier, they're both prose poets, and that almost seems like this drift from prose into poetry. But in fact, it's not a boundary at all. There's a kind of seamless sense of ideas, and I think I'm probably still happier exploring it rather than saying it doesn't. Rather than saying it exists, the separation exists, I would rather say I would keep exploring it. Is the real answer.
Can I add to that a little bit? I've just recently published 100 pieces of prose and poetry about the pandemic, and the poetry, the prose mostly seemed to mount an argument or try to achieve resolution, try to come up with a compelling finale. The poetry mostly simply explored images, ideas, feelings, and didn't try to give answers. It kind of looked at the questions instead. And for me, that is actually a significant difference between the two forms, even though I do write in both.
Okay, thank you. Is anybody else who likes to respond to this? Yeah, if not, I would like, Tipu, yes, Tipu.
Thank you, my friend. I think the real poet does not write a poetry according to the rule of rhymes. The subject, image, inside the thought and imagination development, the form. I think nature is the real friend of a poet or an artist. Therefore, the poet shapes the intangible thought and image in various forms. The object suggests that how to language and the poet should be. The poet transforms the unseen beauty with the power of language into tangible beauty. The sublimity of an artist lies there, where people cannot be people cannot see the beauty, the poet create a new path. Thank you, my friend.
I'd like to thank you. I don't know if you like to add something, Alexandre or Anne, but would you like to add to this?
I'll just
Do
add
you want
that
to go first, Alexandre?
Yes, okay, thank you. I agree with what Tipu has just said, that we don't need to have any special condition to write poetry. We can find poetry everywhere. Of course, the lockdown has forced us to look into ourselves maybe more, and maybe it's also into ourselves that we find new words to describe what's going on and our feelings and the different things we are experiencing. Yeah, and then you can, I'm finished. Thank you. I was short.
Anne. Anne.
I think I'd like to go back to what was said right at the beginning of our discussion about this connection between poetry and love, in that I've just been writing cards and sending festive messages to family and friends this week, and made some handmade cards using poems. And what struck me was this year of all years, I really wanted to express those connections to the people that I love the most. And poetry seemed the perfect vehicle to do it.
Thank you.
It will be nice if we have the last, I would say, words from George, Panagiotis, and Parashar. Okay, thank you.
It's okay if I speak?
For sure.
I also think that boundaries exist for us to break them. All poets meet themselves in relation with the poets of the past, but this new reality gives new opportunities for poetry and for people. And we must not forget that poetry is a craft, it's a game, it's a vision, it's improvisation, and prose and poetry itself combine themselves very often. I would like to close by saying that in these times that isolation is increasing, people become perhaps more selfish, don't look to other problems, think only about the problems of their home. I think poetry gives a new direction, a new depth, and it provides humanity with a substantial encouragement. Thank you.
Thank you, George, and then Parashar.
Okay, a few words before saying goodbye. I would like just to say that there is a big amount, always bigger amount of poetry around in the world than in any given book. So poets just have to search and find this poetry and write it down. These are my last words.
Thank you, George. Parashar.
Poetry cannot escape reality. I have a lot of hopes from poetry, of course. And I would just like to conclude in one sentence. Let there be poetry, there will be light. Thank you.
Very good, very nice. So thank you, all of you, from the Profundis, for this discussion. I thoroughly enjoyed, and hopefully, the viewers enjoyed. And look forward to sometime have a meeting with you in situ, in person, because this is fine, but it's it's not our life, you know, to be like this or to communicate like this. All my best. Keep safe. Be in a good health.
Thank you, Kostas.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you, Kostas.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Merci.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Thank you, Triantafyllos.
So,
where is Triandafyllos and Andonis?
the last part of our festival is over. I must inform you that before a few minutes, Mr. Andonis Kathas and Mr. Triandafyllos Kotopoulos left for obligation of the festival. Our event is over. Thank you everyone for your participation. Your poems are wonderful. Honestly, we are so happy for this poetry festival. We hope enjoying our discussion about poetry. See you soon. Good afternoon.